Hello world, welcome to Cinnabobbin. So today I'm going to show you how to make the Slouch Tote bag, and it comes in two different sizes, the large and the small. Today I'll take you through how to make the small one. I do use faux leather in the tutorial, but of course you can make it out of fabric as well. This is another small that I made out of fabric, and it's got stuff in it because I use it. But I found that they're pretty comfortable because of the strap, and they do have pockets in it as well to hold your smaller items. Alright, let's get into the tutorial. So first you'll need your pattern pieces, so just lay them out and cut them according to the instructions on the PDF file. So you'll need to cut 2 mirroring sets of the main body pieces of the tote, 2 mirroring sets of the top of the lining, 2 of the bottom of the lining, cut them on fold and notch the centers. I made a mistake on this pattern piece. You're meant to cut 4 of the lining fabric. That is because you want a pair for each pocket you want. So I want 2 pockets, so I cut 4 pieces. If you only want 1 pocket, just cut 2 pieces of the pocket. Additionally, you'll need some pins. I'm using faux leather, so I also used clips. But I have found that if you need the stability of pins, as long as you pin within the seam allowance, you won't see the puncture marks left by the pins. You'll also need some scissors and optionally a magnetic clasp for the closure of the bag. And also I used a fabric marker. We're going to start with the lining of the bag, so I grabbed the top pieces first and I'm going to put them right sides facing together, and I'm going to pin and sew along the straight edge of the piece. Now, because I'm working with faux leather, I am going to top stitch the seam allowances open, so that requires me to open up the seam and sew a couple millimeters on either side of the seam that I just sewed. So now we're going to grab one of our pocket pieces and fold it in half lengthwise and notch the center of the pocket piece. You're going to match that notch to the center of the bottom lining piece and just pin it together. We're going to do the same for the top of the lining piece. So grab another pocket piece, notch the center and match it to the center of the top lining piece. You'll want to do this right sides together for both the bottom and the top pocket. Now we're just going to sew the pocket piece to the top of the lining and the bottom of the lining right sides together. Once you've done that, you want to open up your pocket pieces and put them right sides together and just pin along the outside of the pocket so you can sew it closed. When you're doing this, you want to move the seam allowances out of the way and pin as close as you can to the seam so that later on you can top stitch the seam allowances down to their respective sides. You'll see what I mean later on. So again, when you're sewing, just move those seam allowances as much as you can out of the way so you don't sew them down into the pocket. Now at this stage, for one of my lining pieces, I wanted to divide the pocket into 2 compartments. So I just got a ruler and marked with a fabric pen down the center of the pocket and sewed along this line. Again, you just want to move the seam allowances out of the way so you don't sew them into the pocket. At this stage, you want to close the rest of the seam, so this time push the seam allowances up and out of the way and pin as close as you can in that seam. And just repeat the same thing for the other side. So sew the rest of the seam closed and stop and backstitch 1 centimeter from the edge of the pocket. Now, if you didn't want to include a pocket, you can just grab the bottom of the lining and just find that center notch, place it right sides together on the top of the lining and just sew along that straight seam, matching the centers. Now this is a part where we have to top stitch the seams open. Make sure when you top stitch each individual side of the seam allowance down, you move the pocket out of the way. After you top stitch the seam allowance open, on the right side there will just be an extra tab showing. You can just cut that off. And just repeat all these steps for the other side of the lining. So now you want to put the lining pieces right sides together, find the center notches and just pin it at that point together. So while you're there, just match and pin the side seams as well. So now you can go ahead and sew along the pinned side seams and also the bottom seam. But when you're sewing along the bottom seam, make sure you leave a gap unsewn because you'll use this gap to flip the tote bag right sides out later on. Okay, so now you want to box the corners of your tote bag lining. So open up that corner and match the side seam to the bottom seam of the bag. And then you want to sew along that edge and repeat for the other side. Okay, so once you've done that, you're pretty much finished with the lining of your bag. The next step is optional, but it's if you want a magnetic closure on your bag. So generally I will get a ruler and just mark 3 centimeters from the top of the bag. And then you just grab your magnetic clasp and you just separate it and hand sew each side to either side of the bag. You can also use snap closures or a hook and eye or really anything that will act as a closure for the bag. So yeah, you can be creative with it. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the outside of the bag. So we'll start with 2 of our mirroring body pieces and you just put them right sides together and sew along that straight edge. Again, because I'm working with faux leather, I do want to top stitch my seam allowances open. Once you've done that to both sides of the body piece, you can put them together right sides facing, match the center seams, and sew along the bottom seam of the tote bag. You don't have to leave a gap this time. So remember, sew and just top stitch the seam allowances open. Once you've done that, just fold the bag back on itself, and now you want to pin and sew along the side seams of the tote bag, and just make sure you top stitch the side seams open as well. It does get a little tricky and cramped more towards the corners, so just go slowly and just check every now and again to make sure you don't have any extra fabric caught under the foot other than the seam. Again, we've got to box the corner of our bag, so again, match the side seam and the bottom seam of the tote bag and sew along that seam, and repeat the same thing for both sides. So now we're going to put our lining and our outside bag together. So firstly, flip the lining bag right sides out and place it inside the outside of the tote bag, right sides together. Match the center seams at the curve of the handles and pin along the handle curves on either side of the bag. When you're sewing along these curves, you also want to leave about a 4 centimeter gap from the edge of the piece so that you can sew the handles right sides together a bit easier later on. Again, you'll see what I mean a bit later. You can see here that I actually made a mistake and sewed right to the edge. So do what I say, not what I do. So now you just want to cut down the seam of the curve so that it's easier to turn the piece inside out. I also cut little notches into the curve because my fabric is quite stiff. So this is where the gap that you left in the lining comes in handy. So you want to find that gap, put your hand through it and turn everything right side out. So now I switched to filming my big bag because I did not film the small bag in a way that was easy to comprehend. But anyways, this is where we're sewing the handles together. So the gaps that we left earlier will come in handy here. You want to grab your lining pieces and find the seams and match those together. Once you match them together, just pin along it and sew along that straight seam. Once you've done that, just flip the handle over and match the seams of the outside bag. So again, find the seams, match them together and pin and sew along that. It might get a bit tricky, so maybe just do the lining and the main fabric separately. So sew one side, then just take it away from the machine and then pin and sew the other side. Once you've done that to both sides, just give it a little tug, and then you want to press the seams open, tuck them under, and pin the seams together on both sides. Once you've done that, you can go ahead and top stitch around the handle of the bag on both sides. While you're doing that, it closes that area where the pins are. I generally like to start at the top of the handle so I can hide my starting and ending stitches within that seam. It does get a little bulky here, especially where all the seams tend to meet, so just go slowly, you'll be alright. You are almost at the finish line, so go you. Now you just have to close that gap in the lining that you left earlier. You can either do this by hand stitching it closed, or if you're lazy like me, you can just use your machine and stitch it closed. But hey, at least I used matching coloured thread this time. And once you cut your thread, you are done. So cue the catwalk in 3, 2, 1. Anyways, I hope you liked this tutorial, and if you ended up following along, I would love to see what you made. You can tag me on Instagram at Cinnabobbin or hashtag the Slouch Tote Bag. See ya!